So, ladies and gentlemen, truth be told, I didn't know whether to do this at 990% or if this was enough to hit over the 1000% mark. Legal Eagle uploaded a video that is titled How the Supreme Court Ended Trans Rights. And this is about this guy complaining about how the Supreme Court ruled not on trans rights overall, but on trans youth. Which, by the way, I think that the government should come down much harder on doctors or institutions that push this idea that you are a trans youth. This is child abuse, from my opinion, and I think that there should be stricter, more stringent punishments and guidelines about how you make sure this sort of stuff doesn't creep back into society ever again. But Legal Eagle has a different point of view. And in fact, he uses a lot of buzzwords and gobbledygook and long-winded bullshit. At the end of the day, what this video represents, and you'll see it because there are these moments in this video where you can feel the manipulation, where he'll pull out a black and white photo. He'll try to compare transing kids to the LGBT community, gay marriage. Try to compare it to civil rights, because that's what these far-left activists do. They try to basically put everything into one smashed, compact issue so that you can't really pick apart any one thing. You have to either agree or disagree with the whole thing. It's like his version of the big, beautiful bill. You can't really pick one part out. You've got to either affirm or deny the whole thing, and I affirm this I deny this completely. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Apparently, when Tennessee passed a law that states its purpose is to encourage minors to appreciate and not disdain their birth-assigned sex, and that prohibits certain medical treatments for minors seeking treatment for gender dysphoria, but will allow those treatments for other medical reasons, apparently that does not draw classifications based on sex and is constitutional. Why? Because Chief Justice John Roberts says so. That's why. On June 18th,
do you like the way that he says, well, this one justice said so? No, the Supreme Court, 6 justices ruled on this, and they said no. They made a decision. You obviously disagree with the decision, but it wasn't one man's choice. And by the way, the idea that John Roberts is a conservative is absurd. It is absurd. John Roberts, for those who don't know, is the one that gave us Obamacare, because he was able to side with the liberal justices to say that, oh no, Obamacare, well, the government is allowed to do it. The government's allowed to do it because it's a fee, or it's a tax, not a fee, or a fee, not a tax. It was some convoluted bullshit where he jumped on that, and we had Obamacare because of him. That the government could mandate under penalty of higher taxation or fee, whatever you want to call it, but demand that you have insurance. Demand that you have health insurance, which is something that was completely and totally unprecedented. Yes, if you want to drive, you have to have insurance, but you could just choose not to drive a car. The idea was that if you didn't get health insurance, you were going to be fined for not having health insurance. That was Obamacare, and John Roberts was perfectly okay with that. So keep that in mind. He's not a conservative. He's far more liberal.
The Supreme Court issued its heavily anticipated ruling in the United States versus Scrutiny, a lawsuit challenging a Tennessee law banning certain gender-affirming treatments for transgender minors. In a 6-3 decision divided along party lines and authored by Chief Justice Roberts, the court held that the Tennessee law at issue does not violate the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause and is therefore enforceable. And regardless of what side of the issue you're on, this case provides a fascinating insight into the mental and linguistic gymnastics the court will go through to invoke the standard of review that will best support its desired outcome. Now, the Scrutiny plaintiffs, 3 transgender adolescents and their families, as well as a Memphis-based medical provider, brought a pre-enforcement challenge to Senate Bill 1 of Tennessee, the Prohibition on Medical Procedures on Minors Related to Sexual Identity. Enacted by Tennessee in 2023, SB 1 bans the administration of certain medical treatments for transgender minors. Specifically, the bill prohibits healthcare providers from, quote, surgically removing, modifying, altering, or entering into any tissues, cavities, or organs of a human being, or prescribing, administering, or dispensing any puberty blocker or hormone to any minor for the purpose of 1, enabling the minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex, or 2, treating purported discomfort or distress from a discordance between the minor's sex and asserted identity.
All that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good to me. Sounds pretty normal to me. I wonder how our radical far left legal eagle is going to come up with a problem. How is that an issue? That sounds pretty normal. Pretty reasonable. Hey, doctors, you're not allowed to mutilate these kids and put them in this forever assembly line of pharmaceuticals and surgeries. Psychologists, you're not allowed to try to convince these kids that they are the opposite gender when it's very clear that they're not. You actually have to try to help them realize that there's nothing wrong with their gender and to help them grow out of it. Sounds normal to me.
Sex, in turn, is defined as, quote, a person's immutable characteristics of the reproductive system that define the individual as male or female, as determined by anatomy and genetics existing at the time of birth. Now, at the time, SB 1 permitted a healthcare provider to administer puberty blockers or hormones to treat a minor's congenital defect, precocious puberty, disease, or physical injury. The bill's prohibitions are intended to, quote, protect minors from physical and emotional harm by encouraging minors to appreciate rather than, quote, become disdainful of their sex. Now, among other things, the plaintiffs argue that SB 1 violates the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause, which provides that, quote, no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The 14th Amendment was enacted shortly after the Civil War to combat discrimination and ensure due process, and the amendment's Equal Protection Clause requires the government to have a valid reason for any law or official action that treats similarly situated people or groups of people differently. So to this end, the Equal Protection Clause was instrumental in striking down governmentally imposed racial segregation, for example in Brown versus Board of Education, and laws prohibiting same-sex marriage in Obergefell versus Hodges. Now,
Yeah, he really did pull out an edited black and white photo to try to make the moral argument, to try to manipulate you into agreeing with this, because if you disagree with transitioning youth, well, you would be the same people that are disagreeing with civil rights. And you'd be the same people that are disagreeing with gay marriage. It's an emotionally manipulative tactic that is designed to have you put your logic brain away and just agree with him, because if you don't, then you're probably a bigot. Now, from my perspective, I'd rather be a bigot than whatever type of slimeball, whatever type of filth thinks that it's okay to transition children, that is okay with the castration and mutilation of kids. I'd rather be whatever he's trying to set up as the boogeyman compared to somebody like him that is actively making a video that is defending the pharmaceutical companies and these industries putting these kids in these forever assembly lines and basically setting them on a path to this freak fetish ideology that has an over 40% suicide attempt or success rate. That is crazy. Not to mention the people that regret it, which From accounts, I've heard that regret is anywhere from, depending on it, is anywhere from like 5% to 13%. But either way, there's a large number of these people that regret transitioning, and they were peer pressured into it by a bunch of so-called doctors that are supposed to be there to help people. The government absolutely has a duty to step in and say, no, you don't just get to do whatever you want. This is not a moral thing to do, and it should not be a legal thing to do. And if you are a doctor that is helping to facilitate this, you should be in jail, and you should lose your license.
Now, in asserting Equal Protection Clause challenges, courts use different standards of review to assess the constitutionality of laws that differentiate between groups of people. Now, the three main standards of review are strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and rational basis review. And the level of scrutiny that a court will apply depends on the type of classification at issue in the challenged law. And as we'll talk about, sometimes the level of review is the entire ballgame. So, for example, laws that classify on the basis of race, alienage, or national origin trigger a court's strict scrutiny and will only pass constitutional muster if they are, quote, suitably tailored to serve a compelling state interest. And that is a very, very high standard. Now, laws that classify individuals on the basis of sex also warrant a heightened scrutiny, and such laws are subject to what's called intermediate scrutiny, under which the state must show that the classification, quote, serves important governmental objectives, and that the discriminatory means employed are substantially related to the achievement of those objectives. Now, in contrast to these rigorous or semi-rigorous levels of scrutiny, there's what's called rational basis review or rational basis inquiry, which is a deferential, relaxed standard of review that applies to laws that do not burden a fundamental right or target a suspect class. And for the most part, most laws would fall under this particular level of review. Under a rational basis standard, the court will uphold a statutory classification if there is any, quote, reasonably conceivable state of facts that could provide a rational basis for the classification or the law. So basically, under rational basis review, if there is any plausible reason for the challenge governmental action, the court's inquiry is, quote, at an end. So basically, if the court is reviewing something for a rational basis, that law is almost certainly going to pass. If the court is reviewing it under strict scrutiny, that law is almost certainly going to fail. And if it's intermediate scrutiny, it could be somewhere in between. It's probably important to note that absolutely none of that is written into the Constitution. Those are just the rules that the Supreme Court has come up with, but it has been using some version of that for, say, the last 100 years or so. But the reason that we're talking about all this is because the main issue in this Scrutiny decision was which standard of review the court should use to assess the constitutionality of SB 1.
So he's attempting to obfuscate from the fact that he was just trying to defend transitioning kids, and he tries to go to defending this under, well, which scrutiny should this be under? A more lenient scrutiny or a more strict scrutiny? Well, the reality is that in this particular case, the justices went with a more relaxed scrutiny. I think that's fairly clear. Because this isn't on the basis of gender. They're not looking at this saying, okay, well, little girls are able to transition into little boys, but we're only going to be focusing on the boys. We're going to be making this on the basis of this sexual characteristic, which is exactly what the law is intended to try to protect against, that you are not allowed to just strictly focus on sex, or in the case of race. When you are examining this, it's not just one race. So, for example, it would be like if they were focusing only on black men, but not black women, and they were trying to make a rationalization. No, this thing is entirely focused on making sure that youths, people under a certain age, cannot experience this sort of harm and abuse. So it is not based on sex. He's trying to make it that way because from his point of view, he wants it to be a stricter scrutiny standard because he wants them to throw it out because this guy is okay with transitioning kids. This is a guy who's a virtue signaler. He is willing to make kids suffer and allow them to go through this absolutely horrific, evil, indefensible process that's usually pushed on by the mother, in a lot of these cases, and objected to by the father. He's not going to mention that in this video, but there have been horror stories where the mother whether you call it, Munchausen's by proxy or, some kind of just warped delusional need to be seen as like progressive. You've had these women that have destroyed these kids' lives, these young boys, trying to transition them into girls, and it's absolutely disgusting. So any law, from my point of view, any law that protects kids from these doctors and these courts and these people that are left-wing activists trying to push this on the children and allowing it to take place, anyone who is defending the kids, I am on their side. Legal Eagle is on the other side. He thinks that it's perfectly fine. He thinks that the court should have ruled against this. He would have been more happy with that. If more kids were put in danger through this radical left-wing orthodoxy, he would have been fine with that. Which is evident by the way that he's using manipulative language to try to convince you that he's right by saying, well, these same people that are against this would have been against civil rights and they would have been against gay marriage. Gay marriage is a topic for another time. But this is what people like Legal Eagle do. This is what these left-wing activists do. They try to emotionally manipulate you into agreeing with their point of view, but the fact of the matter is that there is no justification for transitioning a child. If you are 2 years old or 5 years old or 8 years old, you do not know what gender is. You have a basic idea, but there's a reason why we don't let kids get tattoos. There's a reason why we don't let kids consent to sex. We're looking at this Epstein situation, right? This Epstein situation is disgusting. These young girls who weren't even like 8 or 9 or 10. We're talking like some of these girls are like 13, 14, 15, which is disgusting. I don't know if there are any girls who are younger. I don't even want to fucking think about it. It's so gross. But I'm bringing that up to make a point that we use Epstein as, one of the evilest people on the planet. What he was able to do and all these other despicable people around him. The reason people are so invested is because they want justice, because what he did was so bad. Because children are innocent and they cannot consent to any of this. They can't consent to having sex with an adult. The problem is that under the thinking of Legal Eagle and a lot of these leftists, they compartmentalize this. So when it comes to Epstein, I imagine Legal Eagle is 100% against Epstein. I imagine that he finds him disgusting and deplorable. I will give him that benefit of the doubt because that is such a basic thing to get right. But at the same time, I just take it a step further. I look at these people preying on kids, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to indoctrinate these kids into this fetish. They're trying to groom them into this trans ideology, and my answer to that is absolutely not. And the punishment for people that try to do that or actually do that should be so draconian that it sends a chilling effect throughout the entire world. That's my take on it. I think children should be protected. And the trans community, it's filled with perverts and weirdos. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some trans people that are perfectly fine. But the problem is, this is a big problem. A lot of the people that are cool in the trans community are people that agree with me. That's not the problem. They agree with me that you should leave kids alone. But they're in the minority, and that's the problem. The vocal majority in the trans community are ones that will destroy your life if you're trans and you speak out against what they're doing. These are people that are actively going after kids in the most predatory and disgusting ways imaginable. So, I am on the side of the Supreme Court. I'm on the side of Donald Trump. I'm on the side of people wanting to remove transgenderism from our society. It is a form of degeneracy. It is a mental illness. Those people should be treated with respect. in an insane asylum. They should be getting medical treatment, not affirmed. You do not affirm a mental illness. If somebody were to come into court and say, I killed my wife because I thought she was a demon and she was, she was growing horns out of her head, and so I shot her a bunch of times, you wouldn't look at that guy and go, well, you know what? But he believed it. He believed that she was a demon, so we can't do anything. No, you don't affirm him. You don't affirm that situation. You fight against it. You put that person in an insane asylum and get them medication and get them help, but you remove them from society. These people that push this far left activism and people who are transgender, they should be given the tools to help them overcome this illness. In the same way that you would want somebody to be able to help, you would want somebody to help somebody fight cancer. If you go to the doctor's office, you don't want somebody to affirm cancer, you want them to use chemotherapy. I think that it is unbelievably cruel to give aid and comfort to people that are looking to do harm to others. These doctors, these politicians, Legal Eagle, I think that it is cruel to affirm these people's illness. And so my message to all of you would be that you treat transgender people with compassion. You understand that they're going through something, but you do not ever affirm it, and you do not ever allow yourself to be emotionally manipulated into siding with it or agreeing with it, because it is absolutely objectively wrong. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to go watch the rest of the video, you can on Legal Eagle's channel. But I think he is 990% at this point. I'm just continuously amazed by how often he puts out far-left activist content. The other day it was fighting against Trump, and I would be very surprised if Legal Eagle did a video on the ICE raids in the marijuana fields. I may do a video on that, because the ICE raids in the marijuana fields, those illegals were using children to grow weed. Yeah, so tell me again about how, the people in agriculture, they're the good ones. They're the ones that should say. No, this isn't the video for it, but yeah, my thoughts on illegal immigration. They all got to go back. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time.